Geoff can say more about that, but the Dyalog office has been within Farnborough was the first, probably 20, 25 miles of where it is now for its entire existence, I think. But Camp Road, Farnborough was the first, wasn't it, Geoff?
When we took an office, yeah.
Yeah. And then Alton.
Yes.
And then the bungalow in Alton.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then
part of the same.
Yeah, Old Basing 1, Old Basing 2.
Chinham.
No, that came after. Oh, sorry, that's true. Yes, Chinham, and then Bramley 1 and Bramley 2. I think, wasn't it? Yeah.
Hello, Andy, and hello, Geoff.
Hello, Adám. How are you this evening?
Yeah, that's pretty good.
Good.
It's not quite time to begin yet, but it sounds like you've already got it.
No. We were. Curtis was merely saying that we seem to have been in much the same place all our existence. And I sort of said, well, it depends on what scale you're looking at, doesn't it?
It started with a question about where's Joel located.
Yes. And Joel, you said Joel was in Brooklyn, didn't you?
Joel disappeared to.
Yeah, no, I don't know. Did we say something to upset him? He just disappeared.
Yeah. He was here, Adám.
Okay.
We can both vouch for that.
Yeah, he was occupying the same space on my screen that you are now occupying.
That might be why he's not able to rejoin then.
Yeah, you just kicked him out of the way, have you? That's jolly decent of you.
His connection tends to be flaky, so.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure how mine is this afternoon. We had a bit of an outage earlier on.
Let's see.
Adam's horns are a bit twisted.
Quite sure the dog's gone, man.
That's okay. A Dyalog dog. Not a Dyalog dog. Okay, well, it is 7 o'clock.
Yes. By the way, one interesting question. What colour top am I wearing, Adám? You're not allowed to read where it's from. It's purple. I must say, it looks to me it's very much of a blue top.
It does look very blue. Yes. To me too, but it has a little bit of a hint of purplish along the shoulders.
Yeah. Of course, if you were able to read that, you'd know where it was anyway, what color it was.
Don't know. I didn't go to Deerfield Beach.
Okay, but it is 7 o'clock in the UK at least, and even though there aren't so many people here right now, other than the speakers, then do know that of course this is recorded. We put it on YouTube later, and it does get quite a few views later. It might just be the people that are
otherwise occupied.
Yeah, otherwise occupied. But I noticed that Geoff sent an email this week saying that 40 years ago he started coding on Dyalog APL. And then
one day we'll finish it.
Yeah, still in beta, right? And then I thought, well, okay, since we have an APL Campfire this week, then might as well take some of the people in the know about Dyalog and the early days, and so that's why Geoff and Andy are here. I don't know if you've spoken with each other. I don't know if you've prepared anything in particular.
I've started.
You started preparing. Okay, well, that's like the interpretation.
Effectively, we're going to sort of run through a little bit of the history of Dyalog in roughly historical order, with some little anecdotes that we have from our times there. So obviously, since we do it in chronological order, then Geoff gets to say the first few words because I didn't exist at the time.
You might want to start by introducing yourself to the future.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, I'm Geoff Streeter, and I've been with Dyadic from day one, as you will find out. And Dyadic became Dyalog later, and we'll get to that. So Dyadic Systems started in December 1977. And there's an interesting story associated with that. An advert in computing turned up saying, could do with some APL guys. So David Crossley, John Stembridge, myself, and Phil Gosher turned up to this session. And we were all at that time working for Atkins Computing, who were supplying APL on a time-sharing system on Sigma 9s. And Phil was John Stanbridge's and my boss at the time. What the guy advertising was after was a group of people who could sell into Rank Xerox, which was the British arm of Xerox Corp. And Phil Gosha had a Machiavellian streak, and he turned up early and sold himself as the potential manager of this proposed team. Result, I got interviewed by my current manager, which was sort of interesting. Phil's Machiavellian streak continued. He realized that we didn't need the original advertiser if we recruited a salesman. So he spoke to Ted Hare, who was the best at Atkins Computing, and Dyadic was born. I always said two-faced and argumentative. I was the first out on a consultant's role into Xerox Corp, my introduction to IP Sharp's APL, which they were using. They followed a year of 11-hour days, which made Dyadic's accounts look good. I did most of the next 4 years working for Xerox. May 1978, and Pauline Brand came on board, again recruited from Atkins Computing. We all knew her. And she's been really, really important to Dyadic and Dyalog. She is a finisher by nature and a very good people manager. We will no doubt come to her later. 1981, and Ted, David, and Phil thought it would be good to write our own APL. I don't know which direction this went, but Pauline's sister was high up in Dyalog and wanted, I've no doubt you've all heard of Dyalogs because they were famous for the Z80, but they wanted an APL for their new Z8000 machine, which was going to be running Unix. The Dyadic people recruited John Scholes, who had implemented APL for a couple of ICL machines, and incidentally had previously worked for Atkins Planning, so we also knew him. Atkins is quite important for the history of this company. So at that point, we had a team. John Scholes said, I need someone to help. I got recruited to do that. And we went into Dyalog's offices in September 81 and started coding. My son was born on the 23rd of September 81, and we decided that'll do for Dyalog's birthday. So that's why we tend to, John and I tend to celebrate, or John and I did tend to celebrate that particular date as the birth of APL. Most of the rest of the company, like Pete Donnelly and co, tend to celebrate when it first went out, which is probably the Washington APL conference in about 74. So that's where I wanted to start, and I'll take questions on that before I go any further, or before I think of anything more to say. Any questions? No?
So all these people, they were with Atkins.
Yep.
And you spun off your own company, but does that mean that everybody just gave notice to Atkins saying, we're leaving, we're doing at the same time?
Well, we went and had a talk to Mr. Atkins to say, yes, we'd like to do this. And he said, yeah, we did all leave pretty well at the same time. I was the first one out in Jan 78, end of Jan 78, which is when I started at Xerox. And then we came out sort of one at a time. So yes, their team was a bit denuded.
I can imagine.
As a result of that. But I mean, APL was a small thing for Atkins. There was an awful lot of Fortran stuff. I mean, I went originally to Atkins Computing to support their transportation planning suite. which was doing modeling for traffic. Sort of, you know, what you use to predict sort of traffic volumes 10 or 20 years ahead, which is what I'd previously been doing at Ealing Council and Richmond Council. So that's how I got into Atkins. And yeah, we did that. It was quite entertaining. And it was John Scholes who'd put APL up on the Sigma 9s when Xerox, who made the Sigma 9, came out with their own APL. So, you know, there's a bit of, what would you say, a family relationship going on there. And you get this family relationship between Pauline and her sister because she was at Dyalog.
Geoff, where did you learn about APL first?
At Atkins. Well, when I was doing my degree, Ken Iverson came along and gave one evening's lecture. And I completely missed the point. I will be quite honest, I completely missed the point. And then I came across it at Atkins again. So that was interesting in itself. So I didn't catch the point on the first lecture. Sorry?
Did you get to use APL, or was your job sort of maintaining an APL system?
When I was at Atkins, I was a user. I was writing APL for customers. And I did some statistics on a Tektronix screen and that's pretty early for screens. I mean, most of the sort of APL we were writing on teletypes, and we got a DEC 10. That was good. You know, that was a dot matrix printer, and daisy wheel printers and golf balls and things. And it wasn't all the time I was at Xerox, we were using daisy wheels.
And Geoff, we got a question from Rory Kemp. He's written it in chat. You said that Iverson came to give a lecture. What was that lecture about?
APL.
Just in general?
Yeah, it was just an introduction to APL. One of the lecturers on my course was interested. I was doing an applied computing course. One of the lecturers was interested in the APL and invited Ken Iverson along, and he came.
And so when you met APL again at Atkins, saying that you'd missed the point the first time you heard about APL, did you then get hooked on APL, or like did you actually use APL?
Yes. Yes, a lot. And I was still going out consulting for Atkins, and I went into Birdseye to write a program for them. And I wrote it first in APL, but they wanted it in Fortran. So then I sort of just transposed the APL into Fortran for their project.
Without wishing to be rude, Geoff, there are those, of course, who would say you still haven't quite got the point of APL.
Yeah, well, that might be true, especially this trains stuff. I really haven't got into that.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to bear in mind, I write most of my code in C these days, not APL. And that was part of the introduction to Unix and C. And Scholes had picked C as the implementation language when Dyalog was trying to push him towards using their own language for doing systems programming. And that was a good choice on John's part. Good choice. So we learned Unix and C, I would say, very early. You know, when I came to reading, what was it? An obit for Kernighan, and it was during that reading that obit that made me realize just how early we got into Unix and C. So that was Unix 7, and we were implementing on that. Excellent, it was. Has served me well. None of this Microsoft stuff, except of course. They had Xenix, which we did do a port on Xenix.
Yes.
And after we'd written the APL, which took the next 15 months, and there were times when I was writing 2 primitives a day, which is why they're not the quickest algorithms in the world at that stage, but we did get it implemented in the 15 months and took it to Washington. And we'd done one port by that stage, so we had the Dyalog version and a version on a machine called a Gould, which was the Dyalog was a 16-bit machine, the Gould was a 32-bit machine, and we had to do a quick bit of writing because the Gould required doubles on double boundaries, so on 64-bit boundaries. We hadn't come across that idea before. And so we did a bit of writing for that, which paid dividends later on quite a lot of other machines, and still pays dividends when it comes to vector processing machines, which tend to have even harsher requirements. So now we had an APL that was on the market. Didn't sell very well, but it was on the market. And it survived. That's when we took an office in, where was it?
Camp Road, Farnborough, wasn't it?
Sorry?
Was it Camp Road, Farnborough?
Yeah, that's Camp Road, Farnborough, yeah. And we were in an office there. And then the company stretched itself a bit far on that, didn't want to back it any further, and we were taken over by Linwood, who made APL terminals. So they knew about us from that.
Well, strictly speaking,
and they were really after Unix and C people.
Strictly speaking, Linwood made terminals, a considerable number of which were hardened and sent to the UK military, I believe. But they actually
the police.
Yes, yeah, and these terminals were what can only be described as hernia-inducing lumps. They're about that by that, and if you had one of those on your shoulder for more than 5 or 10 minutes, you knew all about it as your shoulders kind of did that.
Yeah.
And when you got to Linwood, that's when you actually ported to the Altos, wasn't it?
Yeah, we pointed to the Alpha, which is where you come in.
The Altos.
Altos, yeah, that's Altos. Where you came in, because you had an Altos somewhere or other, some insurance company.
No, I by this point had I'd done my degree in actuarial science and joined an actuarial team at a reinsurance company in the centre of London. We were using APL on, I think it was STSC's APL on individual compact laptops, compact luggables and XTs.
Oh, yeah.
And I eventually, one day I said to the boss, this is silly. We're having to copy the data around on floppy disks because we didn't have such things as networks. Why don't we get a computer that allows us, one big computer we can log on to? And he said, well, if you're that clever, go and do something about it. And we eventually did a short, we went to see STSC on a PCAT, where the screen was about that by that, and it was a green screen. And I thought, yeah, so what? Then we went off to see Micro APL, who were just about on the point of releasing their new machine, the Aurora. And there's something about Micro APL that didn't appeal to me. And then we went to see Dyalog APL on a Sun workstation, which of course was a graphics screen with resizable windows and the such like. So ASCII screen, not sure about what this one is. Lovely Sun workstation with movable mice and that sort of stuff. Well, that wasn't difficult to guess which one we voted for there. So that was Dyalog APL for us. And then the powers that be decided that we probably didn't need workstations and that effectively an Altos with Linwood terminals on it would suffice. So I think we decided to buy that, and we bought it from Dyalog since we wanted Dyalog APL. And we'd met Pete and Pauline Brand and Pete Donnelly, who were effectively the sales team. And then this computer turned up, and they turned up in their suits, and this third gentleman turned up looking like a right scruff, and we thought, oh, that must be the van driver or the delivery driver. John Scholes, actually. So my first impression of John Scholes was he's the oik who's been hired to drive the van and drop the computer off. So, it didn't take me very long to realise I got that one seriously wrong.
So did the Dyalog APL have a GUI interface on Sun systems?
That version of Dyalog APL only ran in a console window, though I still think it responded to window resizes. Yep. So in effect, it was a terminal emulator, but were resizable, because I think we've had that since very, very early on, haven't we, Geoff?
Yeah.
Because actually it's quite easy to implement that, because there's a signal on Unix that says my window has resized. So do something sensible when that happens.
Yeah, and we also did an X Windows system written direct to the X interface for the Sun, which has died a death.
So
both in the X window interface and the Sun.
So a year or so after I did that, I was forever ringing up Pauline, as she was the support department in those days, and asking awkward questions, including, the famous one I remember was when I rang up and said, I don't suppose, wouldn't it be good if Dyalog had a function which effectively could swap the left and right arguments around? To which she said, have you tried commute? So she was getting that sort of question from me. And eventually one day I had a flaming row with the boss, and I went home. I remember I was listening to Blondie's Parallel Lines. Not a good record, not a good album to listen to when you're not in a very good mood, because by the time I got home, I was like a human volcano. And so I rang up Pete and said, where do I find a job in the APL world? And he said, come and talk to us. So, I knew Pete, I knew Pauline. This is looking promising. So I go down to their offices in Alton for my job interview. Hottest day of the year, wearing a suit. And I get introduced to the HR lady from Linwood, who gave me the usual HR stuff. I'm thinking, yeah. I'm going to go down and talk to Pete and Paul, chat in a minute. Brief chat, all sold, all sorted. And so she said, right, let me go and introduce you to Pete and Pauline. And we go down into the room and she says, this is Peter, this is Pauline. And then shut the door and sat down. And I thought, oh my goodness, this is a proper job interview. I have done no preparation for it whatsoever. And then I looked at Pete and Pauline and felt much better, because it was faintly obvious from their faces that they too thought it was going to be a chat and not a proper job interview. And they had done no preparation for it whatsoever either. So that was one of the more sticky conversations that the three of us had, because we were trying to pretend to be grown-ups and probably failing miserably. But that's basically when they said, yes, come and join us, and come and join us as a support department. You've been making my life a misery for the last 2 years, Andy, says Pauline. Now you can take it from all of our customers instead of just you. And that's basically when I started with Dyalog APL in about June 87, I think, in Park House.
Andy, I missed one thing. You said you came to them with this notion you wanted a job in the APL world, but how did you get into it then? Why an APL job?
Because I was going to become an actuary, and actuaries in those days, it was APL stood for an actuarial programming language, and it literally was. A slightly disjoint story. I took a year out from university and worked in a company in the south of England, and I was using Apple II computers programming in Pascal. And one occasion, quite honestly, I said, I wish I could. I've got all these codes. I'd love to have them in order. One of my colleagues said, "You need APL for that." So he led me up to this terminal, which I afterwards discovered to be a 3278 terminal, and said, "Look at all these. Basically, the columns, whatever it was, eight dots and a space, 8 columns." He said, "Put your codes in and hit F6." And it will sort it for you, and that's APL for you. And I must say, I sat there thinking, this is the weirdest language on the planet that you use F6 to say sort, because he hadn't explained to me that I was using AP124 and there was some code behind it. The way he explained it to me originally was APL uses F6 to sort. And that's it took. I mean, to be honest, 35 years later, there's still an awful lot of very weird. Whatever word you wish to choose yet that goes on in the APL world, but that was some of the most bizarre stuff of the lot until I understood it. So
that AP126,
AP124,
124, sorry.
I think 124 was black and white, and AP126 was color, wasn't it? I think.
Wait, does anybody actually know what this is? What is this? What are you talking about?
It is an auxiliary processor. It was not. This is IBM's auxiliary processor 124, which gave you effectively control of a. What do I want? In Dyalog terms, it was a screen manager. It was quadSM, and that is loosely what quadSM was very loosely based on that.
Okay.
Well, actually, there's IBM used shared variables to run a separate process to run AP124, and that's one of the biggest uses of shared variables they ever had, was to run that. And they used to do all their file system, component type file systems, using shared variables and separate processes as well.
Yeah.
So, yeah, they did that, and it was quite good. We looked at it and said, we can do better. And the design of quadSM is a heck of a lot better. It's probably the best screen best green screen system you can find.
Absolutely.
But green screen systems don't exist anymore.
Or in colour. Yes, and that's where I wrote that. We did that when we started out in Park House, and in those days it was about 100 people in the building, I think, Geoff. But Geoff, I think, should be pointed out, was well known to the owners of Linwood. Geoff and I both came down the road to Alton from Odium, which is a very windy road. I would say there were 3 passing places in 10 miles. Geoff seems to think
That's about right.
Geoff seems to think there's about an infinite number. And being a motorcyclist, he was prepared to start overtaking, assuming he was on the basis he would abort the manoeuvre. Whereas I would argue that most people overtake on the basis they are most likely to complete the manoeuvre. And so basically, you'd see this queue of cars in front of you, and then, oh, look, there's Geoff half across the road straight out. And on more than one occasion, Pete Donnelly had to put up with the owners of Linwood coming in and saying, could you do something about that expletive, deleted lunatic who works for you? Because he's going to wreck himself and our company car and us at some point. Never did any good, though, did you, Geoff? You carried on driving in the same style.
Especially since one of the top guys in Linwood drove a Porsche that it was a bit demonic with himself.
Yes.
There was an interesting aspect that when we were doing this coding, we had a guy called Adám and myself, both of whom were into fairly fast motorcycles, and John Scholes was a bit nervous about this. It's so interesting. On that road down to Alton once, I'm bowling along on a motorcycle at about 90 mile an hour, and this low-flying pigeon didn't make it, and it hit me on the helmet. It was a real big bang because I'm doing 90. I hit this pigeon, and it sort of it didn't survive. But I stayed on the bike and was steady down to Alton and was just picking feathers out of the helmet.
Adám was one of the great shorter-term people at Dyalog, and I think he possibly had the most movingly heartwarming. What do I want to call it? Not a trick or a joke, but on one occasion we had a party around at Pauline's house, and very early on in the evening he presented John Scholes with a T-shirt with the word Knuth written across it, as John Scholes' hero was Donald Knuth. And John said, "Oh, thank you, Adám. I don't know why you're giving that to me, but thank you very much." 2 hours later, Adám says, "It's really hot in here, isn't it?" And he took his jumper off, and there he is wearing a T-shirt with the word Scholes written on it. And John Scholes, I think, was really quite moved by that. It was a very, very touching gesture, that one, for a very, very nice bloke, it has to be said. So, yes, those were good times. That was also the time when John did actually call us around to his desk whilst we were in Park House on one occasion, as he had just collapsed with laughter. And there it was on this Linwood terminal, and he typed 2 + 2, and Dyalog APL had given him 5.
Wait, that really happened?
That really happened, yes, because the code to display simple numbers was and may still be extremely complicated, and he had messed it up right royally. And there it was for all to see that 2 + 2 was apparently 5 in Dyalog APL for at least 10 minutes of our existence.
That was David Gordon's code.
It could have been, but it was John Scholes who found it. So,
most of it is still there.
Yes.
I might say.
We have fixed that bug, by the way. I think would hasten to add. Yes. So. But yes, and then you mentioned quadSM, Geoff, and that's where I wrote Othello using quadSM, and it played a very, very simple game, but it used quadSM, and you could play a basic. Is it reverse? Is another name for Othello, isn't it?
Yeah.
And John Scholes came up to me and said, "Andy, that's not bad, but here's a paper that explains the a more detailed description of how Othello should be played and the logic behind it. Perhaps you could sort of implement that in APL." And he presented me with this poorly photocopied of a paper translated from the Japanese by someone who neither spoke English nor Japanese, I suspect. And I have to say, after about 15 minutes of looking at this and peering at it, I just decided that life was too short and moved on. And then said to everybody, "Well, we'll just accept it's a demonstration. You cannot possibly fail to beat the computer when you play the computer." Boy, do I wish I hadn't said that, as my boss Pauline sat down the following day and promptly lost. And it's never a good thing to tell the world you cannot possibly fail to lose a game when your boss promptly loses the following day. That was one of the more embarrassing moments, it has to be said. So, yeah. She didn't really speak to me for a couple of days after that.
Wait, what happened to that Othello game then?
It's still
It's still
Othello.
there.
It's still there. It's
still there?
if you search around our file system, you'll find Othello. It's not in a current release, but it's still there. So yeah.
Why? I mean, we okay. We ship arachnid, so why not Othello?
Well, Othello. Well, see, no, quadSM isn't exactly encouraged these days. And yes, I mean, sorry. A few years later, I wrote arachnid in APL. And that was before we had. So this is when JD was first of all developing the GUI interface, and we didn't have bitmaps. So I wrote Othello, where effectively the columns just had AS, that sort of stuff, or blank to show it. And JD, the management weren't very keen on implementing bitmaps, but John and I popped down to the pub one evening after work, decided it wouldn't be a bad idea to put it in anyway. So whilst they weren't watching it, JD slipped it into the Dyalog APL, and we acquired some bitmaps of cards. And then when he put the code in place and he drew we made a change to my code so it used a bitmap rather than just characters. And there it was, the first time we'd had a form on a Windows machine with cards done in Dyalog APL. And John and I sat there, I should say, for about 35 minutes, just saying, yep, because it turned it from a very boring demonstration, widgets that AN other PLC, into something rather more interesting. The only problem with arachnid is I don't know how many members of the particularly Dyalog APL community have over the years asked me the question, do you know how many hours of my life I have wasted playing that game you wrote? And there are still some issues open in Mantis for arachnid. Gita keeps on complaining that we haven't yet put imaging big enough for decent sized screens these days. So that's on. Someone will cop the job one day of actually finding a new set of card images, but no, that's how bitmaps came into Dyalog APL and how arachnid did. And I noticed I started it with arachnid in a single form on a Windows. I believe whilst I was away from Dyalog, it ended up. I certainly saw one instance where I think it was we've seen a .NET version of it. I believe there may have been COM versions and versions where you had 9 arachnid windows in sort of moving around on screens and the such like, and that was really quite spectacular.
Just for the record, for those that in the future will not be reading the chat, we got the question on what is quadSM. So quadSM is an array that represents a character interface and defines, if I remember right, I've never actually used it, but defines fields and input elements and so on.
And
right?
colors and behaviors.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, and you know, we've seen people who have had the basic demo was a little spreadsheet. I have seen people who have thrown 68,000 row arrays at arachnid as well.
Arachnid or
quadSM, sorry, yes.
Arachnid, much more than that.
Yes.
They throw enormous numbers of rows and things like that. So that worked quite well. What we went on to do, having got Dyalog APL up and running, is we wound up doing port after port after port as everybody bought out a nice new shiny Unix machine, either running Motorola 68,000s or various forms of AMD's 4-bit processors.
That is quadSM. So effectively, all that is. Yeah, so what that is a system variable called quadSM, and all you do is you assign. If I could use APL, it'd be dangerous, wouldn't I? Come on, too late on a Sunday evening. This is what happened. This one I'm using the Unix version here. Where are we? We've got. No, I can't find it. Sorry, I'm going to struggle to find this. But basically,
it's right there. About
yes,
2/3 down on the screen. You can see it's indexing into quadSM.
Yeah. Where are we there? Yeah. So we're just interested. So effectively,
this is a very nested array application.
It's a horrendous. Yes, it is a horrendously. Yes.
What's the depth of quadSM?
Infinite. No, sorry, I rephrase that. It is as infinite as it can be in Dyalog APL, if you choose to make it so.
I was just curious when it ran this kind of code, how nested it would be. But their point is, right, where others would tediously issue escape characters to the terminal to make it draw a certain color and then move the cursor to a position and draw things over here and change the color, move to a position. Here you had a logical representation instead, and then the system would make sure to draw the visual representation of the logic.
So if we have a look at this, so this is so this is what come on, Control X said. Quad SR1. Right, so that's what it looks like on the screen. And to generate that, can I do that? No, of course not.
You can print it out. Or...
Yeah, I don't know how big that is, and what I might prefer to do is this. And
what'd you do?
I don't know. Well, I didn't do it right, that's for certain. Yeah, I thought that was going to be bad. I said gets quad SM, edit Z.
Well, it's there.
Okay,
it's so nested that has lots of
yes. So effectively, what you've actually got all the numbers, and all this is doing is specifying the size of the field, the type of the field, the colors of the field, and what the values are. So it's just a horrendously nested array. Yes, so you can see here, somewhere in here, you've actually got the actual text in there as well. So quadSM is all about assigning to and reading from a single system variable. Sorry, Geoff.
What was it? What's the shape of Z right now?
It's 21 by 13.
Whatever that means. I mean, I put the link to the documentation for quadSM for people who want to. I mean, again, it's kind of an outdated technology in today's world.
I mean, here, for example, it's a very simple thing. I've put 10 reshape. That just says put 10 reshape I to 100 in a field starting at column 5 row 6 or column 6 row 5. No, I've got that wrong. Really? Oh, I know what. Yes, because Geoff, I've got to get the right type in there. Let's make that quad A. I think might work better. That's miserably, hasn't it? Right, quad SR1. I mean, quad SR is something that quad SM is something. So you see, that's just a single row column, sorry, single row field. But there you go. You've created a field that's got 10 characters in it, a bit the way down the screen. So that's what quad SM is. As for arachnid, this I have to say is arachnid, and it is the last QA that I do before releasing any version of Dyalog APL on Windows. So do all the formal QAs, and then I play arachnid for an unknown period of time, and I refuse on the grounds it would incriminate me as to how long I might play arachnid for before I'm happy that it's ready to go out the door. but basically, it's just a straightforward card game, which you can while away most of your life on if you really want to. So
it's also known as Spider Solitaire, I think.
It's Spider Solitaire. Why is it called arachnid? It's called arachnid because I think when I started...
Arachnid is a spider.
No, it's actually the case. I think the machine that I actually first saw this running on actually called it arachnid, so I called it the same thing, I think. There we go. So those are the two games in Dyalog APL.
Well, look at that. That's our chief of operations is able to play card games and claim that he's doing QA.
Absolutely. Mind you, it has to be said it's found enough bugs in its time, so I'm prepared to carry on arguing that, and if necessary, I'll just ask Geeta, our CEO, if she'll just go and play arachnid for a little bit. So there we go.
Yeah.
Right. Sorry, Geoff, I interrupted you somewhat.
That's all right. So we did loads and loads of ports to various machines. You get AMD bit slice processors, which provided the pyramid, the ridge, and a few others. And the ridge sort of leads to an anecdote because I originally did the port in California, but then Honeywell in France decided to badge the ridge. So we were then doing ports in Paris. And on one of those ports, it happened to correspond to the 24-hour motorcycle race at Le Mans. So I took my bike over to Paris. So I got on the ferry, got off the other end, and a little bit out of town, I got stopped by the gendarmes who wanted to know what I was carrying. So I opened the panniers, and there's a few, magnetic tapes, good old computery magnetic tapes, the sort of things you saw on ancient films, and some boxes of 3.5-inch floppies, and not much else. So the 3.5-inch floppies were interesting because they were brand new at the time, and a box of these was 40 quid's worth. That's UK pounds. And a reel-to-reel tape at the time was about £4. And these gendarmes sort of hauled me down to the local station. They could not believe that difference in price in that direction. So it was some time later that I got off and disappeared off to Paris. But everything about that was perfectly legal, despite the fact they'd arrested me. So, but anyway, I got down to Le Mans to watch the motorcycling, which was good. And we did the port to the Ridge, which was also good. It was quite a good machine for its time. So we've done that sort of thing, and that's my one run-in with the police, I think, during my time. But that was before we were. Can it be before we were? No, we were in the common market, so there wasn't anything wrong with doing it. I had a chat with my next door neighbour who worked for customs in the UK. He said, "There's nothing wrong with that. It's just a tool of the trade." So that was one experience, but it was quite good. Driving a motorcycle around Paris is good fun.
Driving around Paris is good fun. Full stop, I might say. But,
it's the French approach to roundabouts,
yeah,
which is rather entertaining. But driving motorcycles in almost any country, if they're quick enough motorcycles, is all a matter of see the gap, point and squirt.
Yes, our best. Maybe in Geoff's story of floppy disk. Later on, we came to produce the Dyalog APL on for DOS. I think was the first one we used floppy disk for, and originally it was 2 floppy disks worth. An installation these days is 364 megabytes, so it wouldn't fit on floppy disk very well. And eventually it moved on to about 6 floppy disks. So what would happen is we would get ready to release a new version of Dyalog APL, and the master floppy disks would be made. And we then send them off to the duplicators, which was a company down the other side of Basingstoke. And on one occasion, the instructions were very clear. On floppy disk 1, there is a file called serial. Please replace the 6 zeros, character zeros in that file with an ever incrementing value. So the first one is 1, the second one is 2. 2 days later, they came back and said, it took a very long time, that job. We won't charge you anymore, but don't try that one again. And we thought, well, that's odd. You've only got to change 1 character or 2 characters, or even 6 characters. And then I took the floppy disk and I tried to install it, and it installed fine. And then I tried to run it, and APL immediately crashed. Well, that's funny because we started out with floppy disks that installed perfectly and the APL ran. And after some considerable amount of effort, it turned out what the duplicators had done was to search the entire floppy disk 1 for every occurrence, not of 6 character zeros, but 6 ASCII zeros. So it replaced every occurrence of 6 nulls next to each other with an ever incrementing value. And changing that sort of thing inside a binary is not necessarily the best idea. So having decided we get the duplicators to do it rather than Karen Shaw and myself having to duplicate them, she and I then still had to remake every single floppy disk 1, and we were not very happy at that point. So yeah, floppy is not the best thing. And that was possibly around the time when John Scholes came downstairs with the latest copy of the interpreter and said, "Okay, Andy, do your worst," and basically said, I'll have the floppy disk back, thank you very much. I know what you're like. If I give you that floppy, I'm never going to see it again. So he stood there and I copied the interpreter onto my PC, and he started walking out the door, and I went click, double click, sys error. And he hadn't got out the door by the time I said, "John, I've crashed it." And John Scholes just merely turned to me, gave me an evil look and said, "Do that again, Shiers, and I'll chop your hands off." Which isn't a very nice way of treating the QA department, was it? But yeah, that was my best ever, was click, double click, and kill the interpreter. And the problem was that no one had ever thought to clear, effectively, there was garbage at the end of the first line of the banner. And my doing that was basically just generating all sorts of rubbish. And that wasn't one of the better moves for the interpreter. So yes, but it is rather, there's Dyalog APL and 2 floppy disks. To say now a Windows installation is 364 megabytes, which is a tad larger. And I can also remember Scholes on one occasion when I told him that one of our customers was messing about with Boolean arrays of 64,000 rows and 64,000 columns. He went as white as a sheet, as this was rather larger than he had ever considered. These days, I think it was 9 months ago, one of our customers actually fired up Dyalog APL, 64-bit APL, and he had a 2 terabyte workspace completely resident in memory. So I reckon that's probably one of the largest workspace that's ever been defined on a computer. And his calculation was effectively he created two arrays, just under a third of the max was each, and added them. No, he might have. No, he couldn't have added them because that would have overflowed. It needed more space. But he did a calculation that meant it would actually complete in the 2 terabyte workspace and completed in a reasonable amount of time. Unfortunately, he never actually made a note of how long that was, but it was an acceptable thing. And we've seen that. What we see a lot with the biggest problem in my mind of a 64-bit APL is it means you can write a piece of code that says A gets B plus C and forget about it. And if you get a wussful, you merely make your workspace bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And at some point, I honestly think that a lot of people should start thinking about, rather than making it bigger, should I be chunking this operation in some way? Because although it's great to be able to write A gets B plus C, it gets to the point where it takes so long to run it that the end user thinks the APL has crashed and he probably kills the session. So yeah, it's all very well being able to have huge arrays, but at the same time, if they take too long to do any calculations, end users who don't understand what's going on will just kill the operation and kill the interpreter.
It's interesting, if they're going to run 2 terabyte workspaces, if they wind up using the shared workspace stuff that we're doing, then I allocate the first slot of that on 1 terabyte, the second slot on 2 terabytes.
Okay.
So they're going to have to run their shared workspaces up from about the 4th slot up, which they could do. But there are only 8 slots for that.
Geoff, can we have a chat about that tomorrow?
Yeah.
Thank you, guys. This has been a really useful session, and that means that Geoff and I need to have a little chat in the morning, doesn't it?
Yeah, possibly. You can Zoom me in the morning.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, we can do that. What else can we say? Many. Oh, yes. There was this trip to Chicago. And there's a bit of background here. When there came a point when IBM said to Dyalog, if you're going to sell P-series machines, which we did for a long time, so they weren't called P-series when we did that.
RS6000s, the AX machines, yeah.
But you're going to have to sell I-series as well, which was also on an RS6000 hardware, but completely different software and operating system.
Before you go any further, Geoff, it should be said that we started selling IBM Unix boxes, AIX boxes, back in about 1986, because IBM actually asked us to become a reseller in the UK because of Dyadic's reputation in the Unix world.
And we were selling 6151s.
Before that, you sold a couple of PS2s running AX 1.2, and there it was running a 386. Yes, it was running a 386 processor with a 387 maths coprocessor. And because you didn't have to have the 387 coprocessor, we actually had a chip extraction tool which allowed us to pull the floating point unit out to make sure the non-floating point unit version worked. So we were continually swapping them. But no, we had the 6150 and the 6151. And effectively, that's when I sort of drifted a little bit away from APL, because the company, IBM, asked us to sell their Unix boxes, and it became a very, very successful operation. And we were known as the most technical reseller in the UK, and we sold to a large number of blue chip companies in the UK, and we sold disk arrays and so on and so forth. So effectively that's when and then IBM eventually said, we don't want any more just AIX resellers, we want AIX and AIX and I series AS400 resellers, and that's when you went to Chicago, wasn't it, Geoff?
It's a bit after that, because it split the company, because at that point we merged the IBM sales operation with another company,
Yeah, I was too. Yes,
who knew about iSeries.
yes, and
and that split the company, broke Pauline's heart, I might say.
I have to say, I would like to point
Andy and Pauline and Karen all went
with my team
with the hardware sales bit.
Yeah, I have to say, I wasn't given much choice in the matter.
Went separately.
Yeah.
And then sometime later, I went out to Chicago to see a customer there, and we decided we needed some more AIX expertise than we had, and we invited Andy along for that. And whilst we were there, I was sort of said, see if you can recruit him. So we're sitting in this rather nice hotel in Chicago, and I say, I've been asked to talk to you. And that's when Andy came back to the APL side of the business, and not very long afterwards dragged Karen back to the APL side of the business.
Geoff, let me tell you, as far as Karen concerned, that was the longest 12 months of her life. But no, it was a lovely. I just sat in this beautiful. It was the Palmer House Hotel in Chicago, which has a beautiful Art Deco atrium. And Geoff just sat at the other end of the table and smiled at me and said, "Morton would like a word with you," and I knew exactly what Morton's words were. So I was very, very happy for that. And then Morton took me out to a very nice pub just outside Basingstoke, the Gamekeepers, and spent a very nice meal in about 2 hours selling me on the idea of returning to then Dyalog. I admitted after, I was told him about 2 years later that he could have quite frankly given me a blank. If he'd given me a blank piece of paper to sign, I'd have signed it, as I would have done anything to come back to the APL world. And then that was when I popped into the office to pick my contract up, and John Scholes walked in and said, I walked in and John Scholes said, "Andy, it is absolutely lovely to have you coming back to us. Quick, everybody, save your work. You know what he's like." So my reputation had remained, and that's when I came back, and Karen, who we've mentioned Pauline, who was one of the leading lights of the history of Dyadic. Without her, we wouldn't be where we are now. We wouldn't be here if we didn't have Karen either. She is our chief cat herder. How she puts up with us lot, I do not know, but she's done it now for, no, I'm not going to say because I'll get in trouble if I say how long it is, but it's a very long time.
Yeah.
And so she and I kind of were brought back to effectively try to be the grown-ups in the office in Bramley, and try to keep the company on the straight and narrow. That's never very easy with this lot. And I actually class myself as that lot as well, as I know I don't necessarily follow the things I'm meant to. But no, it was a great thing to be invited to come back, and say both of us bit the hands that offered it off to. So that was lovely. So yes, and that was, what does that take us to, Geoff? That takes us to where were we? So that would have been about that. So that was 2009. Yes. So I came back and promptly broke my leg. That was it. Yes. Yes. Dyalog 2009. I think it was in 2009 in Princeton. And on the Thursday, Morton said to me, "Andy, I'm going to go out for." We're chatting, and he said, "Okay, Andy, I'm just going to pop out for a cycle ride now, long cycle ride. Then I'll be ready to hop on a plane tomorrow morning, as I've done a bit of exercise." And I thought, what a very good idea. So the following day, I went out on a bike, and halfway around fell off. And as I started falling off, I thought, this is going to hurt. I may not be able to get to Princeton. Morton and Geetha aren't going to be very pleased about this. Remember, Andy, Morton suggested it because he said it's a good idea to go out for a cycle ride. Good, I can blame Morton. Followed by, that hurt. So the day when I was meant to be flying out to Princeton for my first ever Dyalog conference, I was lying in a hospital having my leg fixed. But yeah, and since then, I have been to rather more of the Dyalog conferences, which have always been. We would like to think a Dyalog conference it's a long week. And there's a lot of APL talked about, and there's a lot of other things going on. There's a lot of good food as well, and it's one of the highlights of the year. Yes.
But we've lost more time to bicycle accidents than we have to motorcycle accidents.
Yes, I think you're probably right.
Although Adám, after he'd left us, he threw his bike down the Nuremberg ring and was out for a long time.
Yeah, he basically broke. He made a right mess of his jaw, didn't he? I think, amongst other things, he had his jaw wide up.
Rather more than his jaw. Yeah. You don't want to throw a motorcycle down the Nuremberg ring.
No.
We lost Dan to a motorcycle.
Yeah, we did.
Yes, we did.
That was a very sad. That I think was one of the. That was the. To be honest, Dan was almost the first person we lost from Dyadic and Dyalog, wasn't he? If you see it unexpectedly, and that hit us hard. That did. That was a huge loss to us all. Yeah.
Okay. I think I'm about done.
Yeah. So I don't know how much longer you want us to carry on talking about. I can carry on talking for a while longer. We can always have another session if you like. But that's really sort of taken us up to, I suppose, to the point where Dyalog is what Dyalog is today, which is it's sadly without John Scholes, but we have Geoff with us still. Pete Donnelly keeps on writing the documentation when he's not golfing or he's not asking me to say he has a villa on a Greek island, and every now and then I get a call to, Jason and I, Jason's our IT manager, get calls from Pete saying, I've got a problem. The Raspberry Pi that's stuck on the top of a pole with a camera on it to keep track of my my villa not working. Have you got any suggestions? To which the answer is, you fly us out to your island and put us up for a couple of weeks. We'll come and sort it out for you. And he's never yet taken us up on that offer, it has to be said. So yes, Pauline's disappeared off the face of the APL world, which I think is a huge shame.
Huge loss, yeah.
Yes, but no, we have Dyalog will never be a huge company, but Dyalog doesn't want to be a huge company. We want to be a company that well, I first chose Dyalog APL over other versions in that I felt it had been written by a small team, and so it turned out to be. And I'd like to think it still feels like a single team has developed it.
Although Morton will say it's now the largest team that's ever worked on an APL interpreter.
Very true, very true. And we have colleagues around the world these days, which it has its little problems. It's the biggest problem is trying to make sure we talk to people frequently. So we try to have a company get together every year, or well, over the last 2 years we haven't had much of that going on, but that's why we try to have a company get together, because it's so important we all talk to each other. But different people from around the world give us different ideas and different viewpoints on things, and we hoped it makes Dyalog APL a better APL.
What is it they say? The sun always shines on a Dyalog developer? Or something like that?
We're not far short of that. We must be
like
pretty close to that. Yes. Yes. Or somewhere in the world, it's the office time where someone can shout at a Dyalog employee when they're in office hours as well. Maybe another truism, I suspect. But
I certainly enjoy working at Dyalog. It very much feels like a family.
No, I mean, yes, the number of people who've said to me over the years, "You are so fortunate. I'm so jealous. You are so lucky to work there." And yeah, I have spent 35 years with the nicest bunch of people. Although I would like to generalize that. Yeah, no, Geoff, you're one of the greats. Never forget that. But it is one of the generalizations I would make, and I've made this, told Roger this many times. Is, in my opinion, APLers are the nicest bunch of people on this planet. It's just a shame that a goodly number of them are not of this planet. But I have never met a nicer bunch of people in the APL world, and it makes dealing with APL a joy, as well as the language as well. And we have our share of nutters and lunatics, and we are all, I think, because we're all APLers, I think we're all slightly nutty and lunatic, but in a very positive and a very happy way, and I think that's wonderful.
So that brings us almost to the full hour. Now is your chance to ask questions of Andy and Geoff. I don't want to
I'm
sign.
just going to jump in for a second.
Mm-hmm.
I have been associated with APL since the mid-1960s, and I've always felt that we were a fraternity, not a group.
Yes. Yeah.
Sometimes people get a bit concerned and say, what is this programming language I'm getting into here? Is this some kind of cult?
Rory, your question, I think, is that Unix was always going to be tomorrow's operating system. And we basically saw what STSC had done and thought, well, it's about time we had some of that action in round terms. And that's actually when John Daintree joined us. And I remember John's interview. I remember John Daintree. I'll never forget John Daintree. I have to deal with him every day. And he came in for an interview, and it started about 9:30 in the morning, and it was in the boardroom, which is where our 6150 was. And the interview went on and on and on. And around about 2 o'clock, I was beginning to wonder, A, whether everyone had dropped dead in the boardroom. And I was also getting rather cross because I needed to get the computers in there. And what I didn't realize was that in the job interview that John was having, they did an awful lot of the design for the Windows nature, the Windows part of Dyalog APL. So that's when John came in, when we had done the DOS version and we're beginning, and that's he was Mr. Windows APL. But the DOS version, I think, was very much because we viewed the DOS market as something that it was worth us getting involved with. I mean, it certainly did precede the Windows version. It was the case when we released the DOS version that one of the reviews we got said it looked like Dyadic spent at least 2 minutes designing the color scheme.
Yeah.
We'd had about a month of blood on the carpet, free-for-all sessions, which very nearly turned into punch-ups because we were getting so... We're APLers, therefore we are passionate about what we do. And there was a lot of passionate arguing going on about the colour scheme. And for someone to say it looked like we spent 2 minutes on it, stop the arguments. And there's a certain amount of restrain anybody who wishes to leave the building to drive up to the person who made that comment and have a face-to-face conversation with them on the matter. But it was but no, it was, and it was quite a hard port, that, wasn't it? Because I think we were using the Whatcom compiler, weren't we, Geoff? So it was not just a new platform that was so completely different to what we were used to.
The first thing is DOS was really an 8086 system running mainly on 8286 chips.
Yes.
We didn't really do a proper DOS port until the 386 came out, at which point DOS was running 16-bit, and you could run 32-bit applications via MetaWare High-C and FileLab.
Oh, yes.
FileLab allowed you to switch into a full 386 32-bit system.
Yeah.
And MetaWare High-C supplied the compiler that supported that. And the other interesting thing about MetaWare High-C is it turned up on your desk, and in the box was a Gospel of Mark, which made sort of statements about their attitude.
I remember, but it was the first Little Indian port we did, wasn't it, Geoff?
No,
Wasn't it?
VAX
Was it? Okay.
VAX was Little Indian. The other interesting machine we did, which was about the third port, I think, we did an ICL perk, which was the first bitmap screen support. That was Three Rivers Perk was the American company. ICL sold it as the ICL Perk. And it was a very portrait type screen. And it came with not a mouse, but a directly addressing board. So as you moved things around on the board, it directly addressed the screen. But it was quite interesting. And that was really a Pascal machine. You know, C was almost alien to it. But that was an interesting port because pointers to characters were 6 bytes and pointers to words were 4 bytes, which made life a bit interesting.
Yes.
Okay. Any other questions? Maybe I don't know if I should go back and say the question that Andy answered from Rory,
my apologies,
was since it literally started as a Dyalog APL, started as a Unix thing. Why the strong focus on Windows? I mean, yeah, you can see that, right? The Dyalog IDE interpreter on Windows are all integrated, whereas on Unix you get no better than the TTY interface, and you have to add on the separate front end if you want the GUI front end. So that is the question. But hey, we're working on it. Any other questions?
You have to drag me onto a Windows box, but yeah.
Yeah,
it's one of the things I am known for, as I've always been known by the developers, is I have this habit when I need something from them of quietly walking up behind them and just standing them just behind them and slowly move into eye shot, and at which point you can sort of see people hunkering down thinking, if I do this, will he go away? And it's never worked, has it, Geoff?
No. Never worked.
By the way, hello, Ray. Have you been there all the time, Ray? Because I've only just seen you there.
Oh, I came in late. Hi, Andy.
Hello, Ray.
Enjoying what you're saying.
Good.
I missed the beginning part, so
You'll watch the recording afterwards.
Yeah.
how do you
Okay.
get to these recordings?
I can send you an email with that.
Fine.
This is an APL talk, Ray, if that helps.
Oh, John, thank you.
Well, our talk maybe pushing it a bit. We maybe more Geoff and I wittering on for an hour, but there we go.
Yeah.
It's a fire.
Yeah.
A fireside
No,
chat.
oi,
Okay,
fireside
campfire.
chat.
Those
yeah,
are yours.
Yeah,
No,
those
sorry,
are mine.
It's a
Thank you very
campfire.
much.
Now I'm
Yeah,
getting
yeah,
confused here.
yes.
It's a campfire chat,
Oi,
not a
Oi,
fireside
Squire,
chat.
job demarcation here. I do fireside chats.
Yes, that's right. Okay, if there's nothing else, then thank you so much, Geoff, and thank you so much, Andy.
Well, we
Really
hope you've
appreciate
enjoyed this. We hope you've enjoyed listening to two elderly people wittering on about Dyalog APL. It's a company that we have loved working for. In Geoff's case, for how many years, Geoff?
Since 77.
Yeah, and
End
me,
of 77.
yeah, me since 87, with a 6-year hiatus, which was not the happiest of years of my life. But it's been a wonderful place to work. I've worked with some absolutely lovely people, and as I say, APLers couldn't meet a nicer bunch of people on the planet.
Fine. Thank you so much,
Good. Okay.
everybody.
Okay. Have a
Bye.
good days, good evenings, good mornings, whatever else you happen to have. See you
Yeah.
later. Okay. Bye.